Hi, my name is Andy Young. I'm pleased to be here. I'd like to read a trilogy of stories today, or maybe only three if we don't have time. They'll be out of two books called Works in Progress and Young Ideas. I wrote them both, and the reason we're using them is because I don't want to run into trouble with anybody with copyright problems. The name of the first story that I'd like to read is called Hypocrite. It was published, these stories have all appeared in Maine newspapers at some point in the past. Oddly enough, most of the papers I write for have gone out of business. It's probably a coincidence. This was originally published on November the 21st, 2005. We can all learn fascinating new things about ourselves every day. Sadly, though, not all self-discoveries are pleasant ones. I observed something about myself not long ago that cast me in a most unflattering light. I am a hypocrite. Two bits of background are necessary at this point. First thing is, I detest cigarettes. I come by this dislike honestly. Even before I had heard the term secondhand smoke, I knew that cigarettes stunk, and that I got a sore throat every time I was around smokers. My aunt and two of my uncles all died well before their time, thanks in large part to tobacco use. I also teach English at a local high school. The books the school assigns each ninth grader to read are significant. One is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Part of the story involves a man named Tom Robinson who was convicted of a heinous crime he did not commit solely because of the color of his skin. Another mandated text is Lord of the Flies, which concerns a group of boys stranded on an uncharted island. There's a bright young lad in their midst capable of helping them escape their plight. Unfortunately, though, since he is fat, nearsighted, and socially inept, the group treats him with non-stop disdain and ultimately causes his untimely demise. A third story freshmen at my school read is The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. In this play, a character named Shylock is treated horribly by virtually everyone he encounters solely because he is Jewish. My classes also read John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, in which several different characters, including a black man, an elderly amputee, a mentally challenged adult, and a lone young woman, are all treated by those around them with no respect at best and contempt at worst. The outcome is predictably tragic. Before the start of his or her sophomore year, every student in our school learns that to prejudge a person based on race, creed, gender, age, height, sexuality, weight, or any other surface characteristic is ignorant and wrong. This message is one the students hear loud and clear, and one which all of their teachers endorse unconditionally. Which is why I was so disappointed in myself after a seemingly innocuous incident outside a grocery store on a recent Sunday. My son and I were headed for the store's entrance when I observed two young people about 25 feet from the front door. Both were puffing on cigarettes. The two smoking young men were both significantly older than my son, who was 3 at the time, and significantly younger than me. My son asked me why I suddenly started pushing our shopping cart so much faster. I quickly replied, "We need to go fast to get past the stupid people smoking cigarettes." Seconds later, the inappropriateness of that remark hit me. Cigarette smokers are no less worthy of my respect than men, women, children, African Americans, Hispanics, Quebecois, Swedes, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, senior citizens, homosexuals, heterosexuals, heavy people, thin people, tall people, short people, pet owners, motorcyclists, nurses, welders, farriers, and furriers, among others. The irony of me telling my son those two people weren't very smart, based solely on observing them using tobacco products, wasn't lost on me. Hypocrite that I am, I have overlooked the habit when it was convenient to me. Many years ago, I dated a young woman I found attractive, at least when she didn't have a cigarette in her mouth. While I found smoking just as odious then as I do now, in her case I was willing to overlook it due to some other assets she possessed. I'm also quite aware that there are plenty of smokers who would like to quit but cannot. We now know that cigarettes are addictive because they were designed to be. The steadily decreasing number of smokers ages 50 and older found that out too late. People younger than I am who chose to start smoking made a bad decision. But I've made a few bad decisions myself, the most recent of which was impulsively deciding those two young men outside the grocery store were stupid and then verbalizing it to my son. I can only hope those two young smokers are less quick to judge others than I was to judge them. I also hope that my son grows up to be a more tolerant person than his father, the recovering hypocrite. That's story number one. Now that I've identified myself as a very flawed person, let me go to story number two. This one is called The Scourge of the Neighborhood, and it was published on January 11th, 2011. Phil Sharp lives across the street from me, and he is constantly making me angry. One morning late last month, our family was supposed to be going to Connecticut to celebrate Christmas with my siblings, our cousins, and their families. However, a storm was predicted and the TV meteorologists were advising people to stay home, so we did. Phil Sharp didn't know that, though. He thought we'd be out of town, which is supposedly why he was clearing the snow from our driveway on our front walk at 8:30 that morning. Phil Sharp is younger than I am, which I resent. But I am every bit as capable of clearing my driveway and walk of snow as he is. True, it might take me 2 or 3 hours of backbreaking labor in the freezing cold to do with my shovel what he can accomplish in 10 or 15 minutes with his snowblower. But he was just trying to make himself look good by making me appear to be a lazy, helpless, middle-aged man by comparison. Not only that, he nearly made me hurt myself. It's not easy crawling around the house on your hands and knees so you won't be seen by good Samaritan neighbors or performing odious, time-consuming chores that you yourself should probably be doing. Phil Sharp knows I have tender hamstrings. He was probably just looking for an opportunity to make me injure one of them. Later that morning, my wife all but pushed me out the door so I could go across the street to thank Mr. Goody Two-Shoes Phil Sharp for saving me hours of toil in the cold and biting wind. When I got to his house, he was clearing his own front walk. That's typical of him, helping a neighbor before doing his own work. But before I could open my mouth, Phil Sharp asked me when I had gotten home from Connecticut. Taken by surprise, I managed to stammer out, we never left. The weather forecast was bad, so we didn't go. That's when he flashed me his warmest, fake, pleasant smile, chuckled, and said in his most irritating voice, "Well, why didn't you tell me you were out of town? I'd have never cleared your driveway and your walk all by myself if I had known you were home." He took off his hat when he said it, too. A none too subtle reminder that he's got a full head of hair and I'm going bald. That Phil Sharp is a no-good rat fink who just wants to make himself look like Super Neighbor. My wife loves Phil Sharp. She's always wondering why I can't be more like him. Well, she doesn't say it exactly, but I can tell what she's thinking. I think Phil Sharp knew darn well we were home that morning, and he knows deep down in his black little heart that he'll probably do something nice for us again before the winter's over, and for no reason at all. One 85-degree day last summer, he cut my lawn with his tractor, claiming he just wanted to help me, even though I could have done the whole thing myself in less than 3 hours with my old-fashioned push mower. And he definitely knew I was home that time, too. Naturally, Phil Sharp is always great to my kids, and he's just as pleasant and accommodating to all our other neighbors, too. But two can play at his little game. Just wait until the next time I get home early on a Wednesday and his just-emptied trash cans are still upside down at the end of his driveway. I'll have them back in his garage so fast he won't know what hit him. Better yet, I'll do it and not tell him so he can imagine his wife or kids did it. Then he'll never know how much better a person I am than he is. Maybe I'll pull some dandelions out of his lawn some morning when he's not around, or take his newspaper out of his mailbox on a rainy day and bring it to his front door. That'll teach him. The trouble with people like Phil Sharp is they continually do nice stuff for everyone without expecting anything in return. That puts the pressure on the rest of us to be friendly and nice to everyone else all the time with no exceptions. All the other guys in the neighborhood are probably just as sore at Phil Sharp as I am. I bet his coworkers hate his guts. It is mighty tough having someone like Phil Sharp living across the street. Residing so close to someone who's always helpful, friendly, and unselfish is not easy. Everyone should know what it feels like to have a neighbor like that loser, Phil Sharp. All right, and for the last one, I'll change pace here a little bit. This is shorter. This one is called Funerals versus Celebrations, and it was published on July 5th, 2007. My aversion to funerals began more than a quarter century ago. A friend's sister was stopped at a red light when an automobile being driven by someone impaired by alcohol hit her from behind. Christine wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and as a result, she was thrown through the windshield of her car and died at the scene. The accident occurred less than a week after she had earned her nursing degree from a local university. Her funeral was held in the biggest church in the mill town she had called home, and it was awful. The priest tried as best he could to comfort the mourners, but in my mind, there was no way to justify the death of a 22-year-old honors student who went through her all-too-short life smiling, being nice to everyone, and trying to improve the lives of others. The church was packed to capacity with weeping, suffering, wretchedly unhappy people, and I was struck by the unfairness of it all. When I returned home, I angrily announced to all who would listen that I would never, ever attend another funeral. My mother, a patient woman, empathized with my feelings. However, she also gently suggested that perhaps I might reconsider my funeral boycott if a situation ever arose when my non-attendance could cause some already sad people to become even sadder. Mom's point was a good one. And some years later, a scenario similar to the one she had described came up. Her own father passed away, and several of my relatives and I were asked to be pallbearers. Just prior to the brief service, I remarked to one of my cousins how sad it was that none of Grandpa's friends was a pallbearer. It just didn't seem right to me that we had been assigned the job simply because we were a family. My cousin paused, took a deep breath, and then whispered in a tone implying he was talking to a total moron that perhaps we weren't bearing that casket because we were family, but because none of my 96-year-old grandfather's friends were available to do any heavy lifting or much of anything else that day. After a brief service, we retired back to my mom's house, where a surprisingly large number of people brought food, took part in a wiffle ball game, and told stories, all of which were happy ones, about my grandfather. I remarked to my mother after the event had ended that Grandpa's send-off had seemed more like a celebration than a funeral. And she explained to me that was because a celebration was exactly what it was. It takes 5 hours to get to my mother's home in southern Connecticut, so it's unusual that I go there on 3 consecutive weekends. However, events have warranted my doing so recently. 2 Saturdays ago, my wife, my 3 children, and I attended a graduation party for my cousin's daughter. Everyone, particularly my mom, thoroughly enjoyed the festivities. Then last Saturday, I was cutting the lawn when I got a phone call advising me that Mom had suffered a massive stroke. I arrived in Connecticut about 10 hours before she died. This Saturday, my family and I will again drive 5 hours south. However, my wife and I have already explained to the children that we're not going to a funeral. We will be attending Grandma's last celebration.